Hello, and welcome to another edition of BNEWS In Depth. I'm your host, Rich Hosford. The death of George Floyd at the hand of a Minneapolis police officer who was seen lying on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds has caused reactions across the country and around the world. Even members of law enforcement have come out to condemn the action. This month, we are focusing on the Burlington Police Department, their reactions, and how they are trained in use of force when dealing with members of the public. We start with my interview with Chief Michael Kent about his reactions to the incident and how training here in Burlington is done. Let's check it out. Here with Chief Kent to talk about the current situation, policing in America. Chief, talk just when you saw the news of what happened. What was your first reaction?
Well, it's interesting. This whole situation came to light. I hadn't seen it on the news yet, but I was checking my email, and I had an email from one of my training officers who does defensive tactics, handguns, etc. And I actually highlighted the first couple lines of it for this interview because I think it kind of sums up where Burlington PD comes. He wrote the email to me. He says, I think this would, and the subject matter is Minneapolis. It says, I think this would be a good opportunity to put out a training bulletin on mindset and use of force. I can't remember a situation where I have been as disgusted with the actions of another cop. The officer kneeling on his neck is a bad actor, regardless of what came before, and I'm sure it was bad. There is no excuse for his actions. And then he goes on to some training things, but that was my first inclination that something went wrong in Minneapolis. And shortly thereafter, seeing it on the news, I agree 100% with my officer's email. It was probably one of the most egregious thing I've seen in almost 39 years in policing. It was painful to watch, certainly. And I don't think I've heard anyone say anything different, frankly, in policing and any other type of profession. And it's sadly, people tend to at times paint with a broad brush, and it's a black mark on policing that we're going to have to do better to move forward from.
And do you agree with subsequently the charges that have come out, the third-degree murder and manslaughter?
Yeah, I'm not sure how the statutes in Minnesota work, but absolutely, that officer should be charged, and through due process like anyone else would. I think it was appropriate. I know there's some controversy whether it should be first degree or third degree, and I'm not sure how it works in Minnesota, so I can't really comment on that. And, I think people were upset that it took a couple days, but I think probably the officials out there just wanted to have their I's dotted and their T's crossed. You don't want to take the chance of down the road losing a case on a technicality in an appeals court, so. I think I'm glad that the officer, and one of the most troubling things in watching that video, in addition to the officer's actions, is the inactions of the other officers standing around. This whole thing could have been avoided. All he had to do was go over and pull him off, and Mr. Floyd would be alive. And who knows what state this country be in right now? But they didn't. Inaction is as inexcusable as the action itself, in my opinion.
Would you foresee, or do you believe that, they could also face sort of criminal charges then?
Again, I'm not sure how it works out there, and I'm not necessarily the legal eagle in this department, but I could certainly see them facing some type of charge down the road.
Now, locally in Burlington, because obviously, that is the focus where we want to talk about. How do you do to, sort of instill a sense of treating everybody, no matter race, anything else, equally and fairly?
Well, I think we're very fortunate in Burlington in that a number of years ago, we got out of the civil service system, which kind of tied our hands in hiring. And since then, we've actually, I think we may be, the most diverse department within the town of Burlington. And I think that's where it starts. And it also starts, we have very high standards on the people we hire. And I think they bring a great deal of cultural sensitivity to their work day in and day out. So I think that's where it starts. And we try, and we're very fortunate, the town meeting and in Ways and Means and the selectmen, they're very good to us in budget. So we're able to train, we're able to go to different trainings, and I think you're going to talk to Lieutenant Mills a little later, but we're able to avail ourselves to different training outside of Burlington, and it kind of exposes the officers to a very broad world out there.
So it's just kind of a part of it you're saying is sort of a matter of just expanding people's worldview.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and we're very fortunate here in that our officers, they want to learn and they're very embracing of other cultures. And from my end, it's nice to have officers that want more training, want more knowledge. You're always looking for it. It makes my job easy.
Now, one of the things that strikes me is, we've had incidents, with people dying in police custody in the past. Do you think this one is somehow different, or the times are different? What sort of strikes you as, why there's such a response now, when in the past there has been, protests, but maybe not quite what we're seeing like across the entire country and even in other countries?
Well, I think the time period, what was it, almost 9 minutes that it went on. It was an excruciating 9 minutes watching it. I think the current situation of the country right now with the pandemic might have fed into that. But in my eyes, it was just so excruciating long. And the video footage was almost like a professional cameraman did it. So, I mean, I think that just lit the fuse, so to speak. And we've seen a lot of peaceful protests that are wonderful to see, as well as some of the mayhem that's been around the country also.
And about that, obviously we haven't had anything in Burlington, but Boston, and I know NEMLEC responded. Were there officers from Burlington in Boston? Yeah,
we've had, I believe, 7 officers that are attached to the NEMLEC unit down in Boston Sunday, Monday, and today's Tuesday. They're going in again tonight to assist Boston PD as needed.
And what are they seeing? Is it, majority peaceful?
No. Well, the first night, Sunday, they actually got called in a little later, and the looting and had already started. So things were well out of control by the time they got there. Last night, it was very quiet down there. And hopefully tonight, it will be quiet again.
Now, just, you mentioned the video and, the kneeling on the neck. Just talk about like the different ways that, police are supposed to, respond and control a situation when, they're trying to make an arrest, and why that one was just so far out of the, out of the normal.
That's one I've never, I've been sitting behind a desk for a long time now, but prior to that, I was actually out on the street, a very active police officer, and I've never, ever seen a police officer kneeling on someone's neck. I mean, it's just something, I've never seen it before. That's another reason that it was shocking. Police work at times, quite frankly, can be a violent profession. If you're trying to bring someone under custody or someone doesn't want to go into custody, it's not always pretty, but there's a certain way to go about it. And once someone's in handcuffs, as Mr. Floyd was, it's over. And then the minute someone's under control, policing's job is to render aid. No matter what that guy was trying to do to you, our job's to render aid immediately. And obviously out there, that wasn't done either.
So no matter what you'd have to do to get somebody on control, once you have them, they're like your responsibility.
Absolutely. I mean, that guy can be, and again, I'm not speaking to the incident in Minneapolis, but you know, it could be a situation where someone's literally trying to kill you with a knife. But once you get him under control, if he's hurt, you have to render aid immediately. I mean, that's basic 101.
Now, you know, oftentimes I think there's this perspective out there that cops always stand together no matter what. I don't think that this is the case. I've seen a lot of different, you know, police leaders across the country sort of condemning this. Is it just, you know, because it's just so far out of bounds?
It is. You're right. There's been incidents where you might have, even though it may look obvious to most people that it was a bad situation, you may have some outliers who say, well, if you look at it this way, the officer didn't do it wrong. I am yet to find one police officer, certainly not in the Burlington PD, but even in my ranks of chiefs and meetings and Zoom meetings we've been on, I have not heard one person, whether in law enforcement, civilian, whatever, make any excuses. I mean, I think this is just so egregious. You know, there's no debate here, period.
And, you know, so if somebody, you know, people from the community are watching this, you know, what would you say, you know, to them about, you know, the way policing should be and your thoughts on, you know, just how this doesn't, you know, reflect on all police officers?
You know, I think in Burlington, you know, we do policing the right way. I'm proud. I had someone email me the other day, you know, how many citizens' complaints have you had on use of force this year? I was able to tell them none. You know, I'm going to go back several years for a very minor complaint on a use of force. Again, we train our officers to a high level. We hire to a high level. And those officers treat the public with the utmost respect. I'm so fortunate here that, you know, some departments, sadly, that's what a lot of times the chief deals with is complaints from the citizens. And the ones that do come through are very minor and they're extremely few and far between. So, you know, to the citizens of Burlington, I would tell them this police department will continue doing what it's always done, which is striving to become better day in and day out, continue to train to a high level and treat them and our visitors, you know, with respect and dignity as they have since I've been here for over 10 years.
And a couple just last things, you know, so in response to this, there has been obviously widespread protests. Some of them have gotten a little out of control, I would say. What are your thoughts on just, you know, not here in Burlington, but just across the country, people's sort of response to this incident? Do you think it's appropriate? How would you like to see, you know, people respond? But obviously, I don't think any of us want to see small businesses damaged, things like that happening.
You know, again, it all goes back to peaceful protest. I think in Boston on Sunday, you know, I mean, I think the whole state was probably watching it on and off during the day. And, you know, it was just what it was supposed to be, a peaceful protest, making their point. When nightfall comes, sometimes things change. I think outliers that probably weren't part of the protest got involved, and I don't think it was necessarily the protesting crowd that was causing the problems. And you know, watching it on the news that night, it looked like, you know, total bedlam in the city. So certainly that's not an answer to be you know, tearing apart a small business shop and putting that guy possibly out of business. I don't know what that accomplishes and what that does for the memory of Mr. Floyd.
Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate you taking some time to chat with me today. I know
Absolutely.
It's a difficult time right now for everybody with the pandemic and now this happening, but I hope you stay safe and healthy.
I appreciate it, Rich. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also spoke with Lieutenant Glen Mills about the training in general here in Burlington. Let's take a look at the interview.
Lieutenant Glen Mills from the Burlington Police Department. Lieutenant, thanks for taking some time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Just wanted to start off, your thoughts when you saw, what happened in Minneapolis.
I can't even tell you. I know everyone who's watched that has just been revulsed by it, but especially being a police officer, I mean, I think every officer had the same reaction. They're watching that saying, what is that officer doing? Get off his neck. Why is he still doing that? It's just shocking and horrifying to watch.
Now, I know, we were talking a little bit before we started the recording, and you're talking a lot about training and how that, makes a big difference. What's sort of like the level of training that, happens at the Burlington Police Department, maybe compared to other departments?
So we've been very fortunate here in Burlington. We have a good training budget. We do a lot of training that runs the gamut from use of force to investigations. A lot of the training in between involves things like de-escalation, communication, how to work with people, how to get them to you really don't want to get into that use of force if you can talk people out of it. So the other thing I could say is our use of force training, some people say, well, you spend a lot of time on that. And in fact, yes, we do. And one reason is because some of these incidents are from officers who are just poorly trained in use of force. And instead of doing proper techniques, they sort of make up their own in the field, and they wind up doing horrible things because they are afraid, they're not confident in their abilities and their training, and they just do some things that make no sense. So we want to make sure we never have that situation. And on the other end of the gamut, we spent time getting mental health first aid training for our officers and crisis negotiation training. A number of us have gone to the FBI crisis negotiator school. We were going to have CIT training here, crisis intervention team training here. Unfortunately, that got sidelined by COVID-19. But we are looking forward to when we can reopen our training room and start hosting classes here again, so we can get back up on that.
Well, like you said, it was an interesting point. I just want to drill down on it a bit. The training, using different techniques, using different, ways of, stopping people. The point I think that you were making is that the more you train, the better you get at it, the less likely it's going to go wrong. Correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. If you look at some really good uses of force, and I know they all look pretty scary if nobody's ever had to experience something like that, but the ones that look good, where someone is gently taken to the ground and it looks fantastic, it looks like a martial arts movie or something where they're just taken down, they're not hurt. Those are rare, but we'd like to have really good technique, because when you are taking someone to the ground, it's just a lot easier if you do it properly. You have to use less force. Some officers get trapped in patterns where they're trying to get someone, let's say, to release an arm from under their body, and they're trying to get that arm behind their back so they can handcuff them. Well, sometimes they'll do strikes, and sometimes we'll see problems when officers just keep doing the same thing over and over again, even though it's not working. And then that begins to look excessive. And I mean, honestly, it's bad technique if it's not working, and you have to do something else. So a lot of officers get in trouble for things like that. This particular case, though, in Minneapolis, this has nothing to even, I don't even know what you can talk about with his use of force in that situation. Was just, that's not even a lack of training. That is just beyond anything that anyone here has ever seen. It's just horrifying.
Now, are there certain, moves, techniques, like, chokehold or something that maybe is used in some places, but not in Burlington?
Yeah, so we don't use anything. We try to stay away from the neck at all times. Anything around the neck is potential deadly force. So if you're in a deadly force situation, you're forced to defend yourself, you might do something here with the neck. Less lethal techniques, if we use our less lethal devices, we avoid the neck. You never deliberately target the head or the neck or other areas, because you're trying to do the least amount of damage and use the least amount of force necessary to accomplish your objective. So neck restraints are something that we just don't really use. There are other agencies that have used what's called a lateral vascular neck restraint, and that's basically sort of like the chokehold you would see on mixed martial arts fighting, the UFC. You'll see them use it all the time in the ring. So that's not a technique we would typically use. That's to render someone unconscious. But we just stay away from that because it's very risky.
Mm-hmm.
You run the risk, if you're not very skilled in doing a technique like that, then you can cause a lot of damage. You can, and in fact, kill someone. So that's not a technique we would typically use. We just have to be very careful with certain areas of the body. We try to avoid them. Now, in the middle of the fight, somebody might try to strike someone on the collarbone. But because people are both moving at the same time, it's really not like the movies. It's about 100 times faster than people imagine. And if someone moves, you may hit someone in the neck. You're not trying to. You're trying to hit a collarbone. You're trying to hit an arm. But these are very fluid situations. So I can tell you that even the best uses of force to someone who's not as familiar with this area, they can look really bad, even sometimes when they're good.
Mm-hmm. And do you think, you know, the amount of training, just having officers that have a little bit more confidence that the techniques that they have in their sort of tool bag will work, sort of makes it so that they don't sort of overreact as much in a situation?
Yeah, we try to do everything we can to not get to that level of having to use lethal force. So we have tools on our tool belt. Pepper spray, for example. Pepper spray, as far as I know, has never killed anyone in the U.S. I believe there may have been one case with an infant that was exposed to it who developed an infection, but it's a pretty safe tool that we've been using for decades. Batons, we have batons. I can tell you from our use of force reporting, we hardly ever use those, but they're available to us. It's another less lethal technique. And I say less lethal because there's always a potential for a lethal outcome. If two people wrestle and, you know, let's say I have a heart condition, I don't know it, I could die from that. So anytime you get into any kind of physical conflict, there is a potential lethal outcome, but we're always trying to avoid that as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
We use numbers too. One thing that helps is having multiple officers at a scene. So rather than trying to get into a fight with someone, it's very hard for one person to control another person without having something bad happen. But when you have multiple people, one can grab an arm, one can grab the other arm, one can grab a leg, etc. And it's a lot easier to control someone without them hurting you or them hurting themselves. So we try to emphasize using teams, using good technique, using less lethal devices. And I'm not the expert on this area. This is Lieutenant Hannafin, Lieutenant Tim McDonough, do all the training in our use of force. But I can tell you that we take it very seriously, and we do incorporate into each and everything. We're looking at all of our other options, and we're trying to avoid that highest level of force at all times.
Right. And just the last couple of things, you know, we talked a lot about the training, physical training and stuff, but do you also believe that, you know, there's training that helps kind of like just get people in the right mindset to, you know, want to de-escalate and along those lines, do you think, you know, if a situation like this were to happen in Burlington and there was, as we saw with the, you know, George Floyd, there was the one officer obviously kneeling on his neck, but then three others kind of just standing there. From what you can tell, would you imagine that if somebody were to be overreacting, that other officers would sort of, you know, pull them off, try to change the situation?
I think in that case, I don't know. Every officer who's watched that from our agency has been shocked. At first, all you see is that one man killing that other man. But you see it again and you start seeing there are other people there who should have stopped it. Why aren't they jumping in? And every officer's asked that. Why aren't those other officers telling him, stop, get off his neck? And even if you have to, physically restraining them. I want to hope, and I'm pretty confident that, you know, every officer here would stop that. And I've told people, if that were me, I'm a lieutenant, I would tell patrol officers, you should stop me from doing that. And I think they know that. But we try to emphasize that we're all responsible for each other. And part of our training too in de-escalating, and we took something here years ago called verbal judo, where they practiced grabbing a fellow officer and calming them down, because people get heated. And that's the biggest problem we have is we can only hire people and human beings. So we have the same issues that all people have, where you can get angry, and sometimes when things get really bad, people lose control. We seldom see that here, and I don't remember ever seeing it really in my career. But I know that if someone here were to lose control to that degree, I'm pretty confident that everybody here would know enough to intervene and make sure that they stop that. Because that was just such a clear violation of everything that we're taught and everything that we believe, that they would just have to stop it.
Excellent. I think that's a perfect place to end. I really, once again, appreciate you taking some time to go over all this and sort of, give the Burlington Police perspective on the situation.
Thank you.
Up next is my interview with Lieutenant Dan Hannifin, who conducts use of force training here in the Burlington Police Department. Let's check it out.
I am now joined by Lieutenant Dan Hanafin of the Burlington Police Department. We are going to talk about training here in Burlington and, just basically how things might be a little bit different here than in other departments. So thank you for taking some time, Lieutenant Hanafin, today. And I know you've been out in Boston sort of, helping in that situation. So I appreciate, you waking up and having a few moments for us today.
Good morning, Rich. Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
So first of all, I just want to ask, we've all seen the video. What went through your head when, you saw, an officer kneeling on the neck of a person already subdued, handcuffed, the whole situation?
Well, first of all, I think, the first thing that went through my mind is probably the same thing that went through the mind of most Americans. That was an egregious, horrible thing to watch. It was wrenching, actually. And from my perspective, and from I think from every police officer that I know, we knew instantly that it was a horrible thing to watch and see for all of Americans. But with us, that is not what we want to represent us as police officers. It's exactly the opposite, actually.
And now, talk a little bit about your role in the department as far as training. I know that you kind of are one of the leaders in use of force, trying to, train the other officers and in the department about how, Burlington police officers should act.
Yes. Well, I wear a few different hats at the department. I am one of the use of force instructors, as well as one of our lead firearms instructors, defensive tactics instructors. And then also I run our peer support program, as well as our critical incident stress management program. So those things, the reason why we combine all those things is because it really speaks to officer mindset. All of those things are under the same umbrella, from everything from the use of force that we deal with to the mental health of officers. It speaks to officers' mindset, and that's what we're really. That's sort of the common thread that runs through all of our training across the entire department, and that's what we really try to speak to is officer mindset.
And what do you mean when you talk about officer mindset? Is that just like how people are feeling and how they are sort of coached to approach situations?
Yes. So for instance, in watching that video from Minneapolis, again, just a horrible situation. But there was a few things that immediately stood out to me. And one, and again, I don't think that this is unique to just police officers seeing this, but I think it's something that any caring human being would see is first when you join the audio with the visual, you see at some point, and I believe you actually had it on your site. I was looking at some of your other previous stories, and you see a visual of the officer's face, and you can almost see in his face that his mindset is completely improper. And if you maybe pull that up and show it if it's possible when this airs, that I think people will see what I'm speaking of, and that's something that's recognized by officers and everyday civilians alike, or citizens alike. So that mindset that we bring to each situation, but also one of the sort of the systems that we used it's called Integrated Communications Assessment and Tactics, ICAT for short. It's a system that was developed by PERF, Police Executive Research Forum, and PERF is a think tank that's combined a group effort of police executives as well as civilians alike. And the system is lauded by even some of the most ardent critics of the police as a de-escalation system. And when the way to combine all of this is to get, when you have an officer with the proper mindset, meaning that they consider the sanctity of every human life when they're going into whatever situation it is, and when the training and the mindset of the police department, from the chief or the executives all the way down through the patrolman and at every level is focused on that, then I think you have the proper mindset that we're looking for. Is that number one, every human life is important, and there's sanctity involved with that human life. And then from there, you can develop your policies and practices to focus on that, and it works. And that's what we've been using, that ICAT system for years now in Burlington. And to Chief Kent's credit and to the town's credit, we sent our use of force instructors as well as our defensive tactics instructors and things to that ICAT training as instructor training that brought that back to our department. And we've been, as I said, implementing that for years. And it talks about a number of different things, but mindset is primary. And an officer that has a healthy mindset, that's taking that healthy mindset out onto the road every day, you're going to avoid most of the issues that you're seeing in some of these horrible situations around the country, where somebody might bring stresses of daily life or whatever it is, or their own prejudice or whatever it is to the job. That's something that we take very, very seriously, and that's not something that we would ever stand for in Burlington.
And do you think that having more diversity in the police department itself, because I know Burlington has been making a push to have, a wider range, people of different backgrounds and ethnicities in the department, does that help?
Certainly. I think in any situation it does. I think we have done a good job of increasing our diversity within the department. And again, that speaks to, our upper command and the town of Burlington itself, I think is doing a good job there. I think we are working. I mean, we could always do more, and there's certainly opportunities everywhere for that to be done in all departments across the town, as well as the police department. But I think it's an important thing.
And before we started, actually taping this nice Zoom interview that we have going on, you were talking about how when, Chief Kent came in, he started making some changes in just sort of the approach to training. You want to speak to some of that?
Yeah, I think again, one of the things that crossed my mind is, the best way to address the situation that we're in right now, and when's the best time to address this situation. And I think you have to say that it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago or more. And that's exactly what we did. And I think there was a real paradigm shift when Chief Kent got here, to focus on training. And I think, again, we can work to alleviate some of the problems that we're seeing around the country with different departments through an increased training, in all encompassing, that big umbrella that includes mindset as well as the physical tactics and systems that we use.
And, so, obviously we had the situation that we all saw on the video with George Floyd, but since then we also had, protests across the country, and some of them are resulting in, some police action. What do you think about some of the responses to, what could be described as peaceful protests, not so much, the rioting, that may be a little, regarded in the media as heavy-handed, especially, what happened outside the White House. What are your thoughts on those situations?
I'll have to say that, like we spoke about earlier, I've actually been unable to really pay attention too much to the news over the last week. I've been engaged in different situations around, Eastern Massachusetts, and we've gone into Boston and things. But what I can say about what I've seen in our area here around Boston, and particularly in town and everywhere from Boston to Lawrence to Reading to all the different cities and towns that we've gone to, is that the issues that we've seen within the protest, some of the outlier situations where there's been, maybe rioting and looting and things, those people do not represent the peaceful protesters that we're seeing out there any more than, that particular situation in Minnesota represents me as a law enforcement officer, or any of the officers that we have here in Burlington. It's completely different. So what we saw is, and over the course of the week, what we saw is some of the initial issues that were happening in Boston, particularly on last Sunday night, did not happen as the week moved on. And part of the reason was the protests themselves were weeding that out. They saw what was happening, and they were pushing that element, to the outskirts in a way from, they didn't want it to be part of their message. And good for them, because that's exactly what should happen, and it's what did happen. The message of the protests, and we were there to provide security and support for anybody that wanted to speak their message of, that's a First Amendment right that we're designed to protect, and that's what we were there for. And also to protect, keep that extra element that wanted to add things that weren't applicable into the mix, like the rioting or the looting and things.
Right. Well, it's good to hear that, the protesters who want to be peaceful are, somewhat working with the police to make sure that the situation is, ideal for getting a message out and not causing destruction. I want to end just with a couple of specifics. So, like what we saw in the video was, Officer Chauvin, or former Officer Chauvin, kneeling on the neck. From my understanding, like pretty much when you're dealing with somebody, even if it's a tense situation, the training is stay away from the neck, stay away from the spine. Talk about just the tactics involved in,
Sure.
Like trying to, bring somebody into order that is perhaps not.
Well, again, that was absolutely unacceptable, completely unacceptable. So basically, in a situation, and I won't specifically deal with that one, but I'll talk about how we would handle a situation. So first off, our use of force policies dictate that we only use the level of force that is necessary to bring a situation, a volatile or dangerous situation, under control. And what that means is that once a situation is under control, that it's our responsibility, our sworn duty to provide whatever support, medical and counseling, that we need to do in order to again, continue that situation and keep it under control. With regards to Minneapolis, I think one of the problems was that there was a long time where he was in handcuffs and he was on the ground with somebody on his neck. Any human being would have recognized should have recognized the problems with what was there. One of the things that we talk about relative to that situation as soon as somebody is in custody, when we know that they're going to be placed under arrest, and we have to, that's something that's part of our job, unfortunately, at times, that person be handcuffed, and immediately, as soon as possible, be transported, placed in the cruiser and transported to the police station, so that there aren't issues like that happen out on the road. But speaking particularly to him kneeling on the neck, that's something that's nothing that is ever come even remotely close to our training. As a matter of fact, we stay clear of the neck and the head. Like there's a number of restrictions that we have that would keep us from that situation. But I think one of the other things that I want to speak about is the duty to intervene that we talk about regularly. There were 3 other officers there, and each one of them had a duty to intervene in that situation. They were all close enough to recognize the problems with that particular. I won't even call it a technique, because it's not something that is a technique. It was I'd say a torture, if you want to put it that way. That is not something that is okay for us. So that officer that stood in front of him should have pulled him off. The officers that were on the other side, down by his waist and at his legs, should have absolutely been removed from that situation. Excuse me one second. So they never should have had. They never should have been involved. Excuse me. They never should be. Should have lasted. It never should have lasted that long. It should have been stopped almost instantly. So.
Yeah, well,
I apologize. I'm at my house. My sister just walked in on the side. She didn't know that we were in it.
No worries at all. Like I said, we're all dealing with this new world of video conferences, and I'm sure there's been so many interviews with kids walking into the background or whatever. So it's all good. But you did just answer the final question I had, which was going to be about the other officers that were there that didn't intervene when the opportunity was there for them to do so. But
yeah, that was I think that all 4 of those officers involved are culpable, and should be held accountable to that situation. Obviously, kneeling on somebody's neck like that for that length of time, clearly he was in distress and clearly needed to change his positioning, and that officer never should have been on his neck to begin with. And the other officers absolutely should have stepped in and pulled him off. If not said something immediately, they should have pulled him off, when they realized that wasn't happening, and that never happened. And it's a shame, because it really does. I don't blame people for being upset about it. I really don't. But what I'd like to ask people to just understand that that's something that it really causes us as police officers a lot of distress to see those things as well. And we're in agreement. But it doesn't represent every police officer in this country, not by a long shot.
No. And I think people will understand that, especially locally. I mean, we've always had good relations, with the public and Burlington Police Department. So, and with that, I would just like to say that I appreciate, once again, you taking some time to talk to us. I know you've been busy the last week, so, taking the time to come on and talk to us and explain sort of, how things work locally is greatly appreciated.
Well, thanks, Rich. I appreciate having me on.
Finally this month, I spoke with State Rep Ken Gordon about what could be done at the state level to help prevent such incidents from happening in the future. Let's check it out.
Now, via video conference, I am joined by State Rep Ken Gordon, who appears to be in his office at the State House. How you doing, Ken?
Actually, I'm at my office at home.
Oh, that's home office.
Yeah, this is my home office. So thank you very much, Rich, for having me here. It's good to talk to you. I hope you're doing okay. I hope Joy's doing well.
We are doing well, and I hope the same for you and everyone with you. So I just wanted to start off by just getting your reaction. I mean, we've all seen the video. It's 8.5 minutes of just sort of painful watching. What was your thoughts when you first saw, what happened in Minneapolis with George Floyd?
Sometimes we see videotape of an event, and first you're thinking, this just can't be. There's a police officer with his knee on someone's throat, strangling them. A police officer, someone that we rely on to protect us, who seems to have absolutely no regard for the life of the person that he's got his knee on. In fact, through some of that video, he's got his hand in his pocket. It's just so nonchalant about it. And then he died. And I was just aghast at looking at that. And everyone who sees it should be aghast. And I'm encouraged that so many law enforcement people, including our own police chief, have said that that's not policing. That's not policing. And I'm glad to see that charges were brought. Glad to see the charges were increased to second-degree murder, disregard of life. And it was a horrific event that happened in Minneapolis.
We had, obviously former officer Chauvin, but then there's also the three others that were just, in the area, sort of not intervening. Your thoughts on just sort of the inaction of the other officers who, as of this week have also been charged?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I want to say that our hearts go out to the family of George Floyd as well. But with respect to the other officers, again, we trust when we hope that police officers will be there to help us. So there were three other officers. All of them had the sense, and I think the duty, to intervene, to say, no, you can't do this. What you're doing is wrong. Stop doing that. No one stopped him. There were three other officers. All of them were in that position. None of them did that.
And, since that day, we've seen a lot of protests, obviously, across the country. Most of them peaceful. There's been, some incidents, usually after the protests ended. But we've had a couple of incidents from the police side of things. It seems like even during peaceful protests, most notably in Washington, D.C., before President Trump's, photo op in front of the church, where police tear gassed protesters and sort of moved in on them. Just your thoughts on just the overall response from not all, but some of the, police departments, police, actions in response to protests.
So first of all, the right to peacefully assemble, to peacefully protest is really woven into our American fabric. We've done that since the beginning of our country. Our country was founded on principles of protest, and it was protected in the Constitution for a reason. So our government should be protecting peaceful protest. And around here, it does. Around here, the police respect that and protect that. And one of the biggest problems that we have from the point of view of our federal government is that our constitutional rights under the First Amendment are, not only are they being attacked, but the federal government is bragging about how they can attack them, is bragging about how people engaged in peaceful protest can be violently moved aside so the president can go, like you said, and take a photo op, which is really a political move, not a government move. It doesn't protect us as a government, but it's instead of going around them. Lafayette Park is a place that routinely is a location where people protest. Rich, you've probably been in that area across the street from the White House. Many of us have been. And you usually see protesters there. And so that was expected. And then other places that we've seen that when violence occurs from the point of view of those that are entrusted to protect us, and the government's response is that it's appropriate to have, for example, military intervention, which is not the principles that this country was founded on, is frightening. And I think that's just as important as anything else that we're talking about, is that we're not getting protected as Americans.
Yeah, and what are your thoughts on some of the response we've had? General Mattis, obviously former Secretary of Defense, come out recently, and others sort of, kind of uncharacteristically speak out.
Well, I don't usually like to comment on what's going on in the federal government, although I just did. And I just did because we're at this precipice where our lives are directly affected and our freedoms threatened. And I say freedoms, I mean freedoms to be safe are being threatened right now. So this isn't a place to stand back and say, well, that's a matter for the federal government. And I'm really focused on what we do in the state, in the state legislature, which, while true, I don't think this is a time that that any government leader can stay silent when we see what we see. It's just appalling to me that what we've seen as a result of citizen video. I just watched today the citizen video of a police officer pushing down a 75-year-old man, and then another police officer kneeling down, perhaps to help him, and a third police officer pulling him up by the back of his shirt, and they walk on.
Right, in Buffalo last night.
Buffalo. Where are we as a country? And of course, this is the exception by far. We don't see that here. We don't. But it shouldn't happen at all. And so you're asking about General Mattis. Yeah, so this is the time that folks who thought, I'll let others speak. I was, in the White House. I owe a duty. Perhaps it's not my place. Perhaps it's easier to stay silent. This is the time where people like General Mattis are saying, I can't stay silent anymore. I know what I know. I've been where I've been, and I'm going to share what I know now, because if I don't, I may be responsible by my silence for watching something and just letting it happen. I don't want to be just a bystander right now. I think he's thinking. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, hard to say what anybody's thinking, but that does seem to be the message. Now, I do want to take it down, back a little bit locally. So, since this has all kind of happened, what is being done in the State House at the state level, sort of in response?
Well, first of all, what we see and what we've learned is that it's the time to listen right now to people who have lived this, the experience of discrimination, who have lived the experience of being marginalized and silenced their whole life. Because despite the challenges that we have in our lives, we haven't lived that experience. And it's time to learn. And so what we've done is we've called on the Black and Latino caucus in the legislature to guide us and to come up with a plan that we can consider and should and will consider to best address our civil rights issues, which include our policing issues. But really, it's the response when we see something that arises, because this isn't just a police issue at all. People suffer discrimination at the workplace. I think I'm an employment lawyer, and I've represented people who have been in that position for decades. They suffer from discrimination in housing. They suffer from discrimination. They're treated differently on the street. And so all of these issues of discrimination also should be put on the table right now. So do we have, is this a time that we can look at things like, how about courses that we're teaching in public school? Maybe we have a sensitivity program that kids at age appropriate level can learn about the experiences of their neighbors, about diversity and other things like that. So I'm looking forward to the report that they come out with, and we can look at what we can do.
And would that report possibly include, maybe legislation focused on, use of force by Massachusetts police departments, anything along those lines?
Sure it will. I'm sure that it will. And I'm sure it will do things like when there is a use of force, there's going to be a full report about it that's got to be documented and cataloged so that we can look back on it and compare where, what's happening trend wise. That's absolutely got to be there. And there also has to be legislation capping force as reasonable force. So we'll see that come in.
Yeah, I know everything is still right now in the phase of, like you said, listening. So
right,
the details will we'll be able to address later. Just a couple last things. One, obviously people are upset and they want to continue to protest or to have vigils. Just talk about, your message to them to, that it is their right, but also we are still facing, the COVID-19 pandemic. Just, about, maybe a message of safety too, that we can't ignore the situation that we're in just because, this other thing happening.
Rich, your video glitched a little bit, but I'll jump in by saying that thank you for the question, and you're also answering the question the way I would in the way you pose it, because you're right, I am concerned about this. I absolutely respect and protect people's rights to peaceful protest, but we still have a virus out there, and that virus is tremendously is of tremendous concern. It didn't go away, and it would be the front burner issue right now if it wasn't for the civil rights issue that we're now talking about. And so people have to, I hope that people will keep in mind to socially distance. Keep in mind that as of now, when we're talking, it's Friday the 6th. So as of now, the governor still has in place, an advisory advising people to refrain from gathering in groups of 10 or more. And so when I'm a little worried when I see people gathering in large groups. Most of the people I see are wearing masks, but still the groups are large. And it takes me back to what I learned about the pandemic in 1918, where after World War II, the troops came home, people gathered in tremendous numbers on the streets to welcome back the troops, which is tremendously important, and they should do that. But it didn't seem as if people were distancing at that point, and the worst of the virus came right back after that. And so, and again, I'm not criticizing anyone for welcoming home the troops after World War I. They should have, but we need to find ways to do both things, and I think we can do both things. So I really applaud BCAT for getting involved with a lot of video programs, opportunities for people to get together, and by viewing BCAT, by looking at your YouTube channel, they can do that. In Bedford, we're also doing some things there virtually. I know the interfaith group in Burlington, I think it spans into both Burlington and Bedford, is working on a CSA. Working on a short video that will help. I think those opportunities are very, very important.
And last thing, just from your perspective, people watching this who are upset, people of color watching this, just your message that people in the State House are actually ready to listen to constituents.
We absolutely are. First of all, I hope that people understand that the empathy by which we are looking at this is sincere. It's time to look. We've done things like we passed a criminal justice reform bill just 2 years ago. We did some great things. We reduced mandatory minimums in most instances. Bail we addressed. We did things, but that's not enough. And this is an opportunity to focus on what more we can do, not only within a second criminal justice reform look, but also, like I said, civil rights. We can review and will review all of the ways that we address our racial diversity, and making sure that people have not only equal opportunity, but also equal respect. And Rich, I appreciate the time that you're taking, but one thing I do want to talk to you are the things that we're doing locally and have been really doing locally to address this issue, because we don't see this locally. Our police chiefs, Chief Ken, I talked to him. He is so committed to the idea of treating everybody fairly under the law with respect to his job, but also fairly when he sees them in the community too, because we've got to trust each other. And people have to know that when they approach the police, that there's that level of trust that they can count on the police, and the police can count on our residents as well to have this this discussion, and that is happening. And so there are a number of ways that that our police get involved with, helping out with Little League events, helping out with other things in the community, and there's a reason for that, because that helps us get to know them and them get to know us. There's a reason that so many people who grew up in Burlington serve on the force, because they're invested in our community, and it goes way beyond, in a good sense, things that we see in other places. That's important. We work hard to establish and maintain that level of trust. And so I'm proud of what we're doing here, but we can do more.
Yes, there's always more that can be done. Well, unfortunately, we have no more time today to talk about them, but I do appreciate you taking some time from your home office to join me here via Zoom, as everything is done these days. And hope everybody is safe and healthy.
Same here, Rich. Thank you very much for the talk. I appreciate it.
And there you have it, an in-depth look at how police training is conducted here in Burlington and what might happen at the state level to prevent such incidents as what we saw in Minneapolis from happening here in Massachusetts. I'd like to thank all my guests, Chief Michael Kent, Lieutenant Glen Mills, Lieutenant Dan Hannifin, and State Rep Ken Gordon for joining me this month. I'd also like to thank all of you for watching. We'll be back next month with another edition of BNews In Depth, so stay tuned.